You don't need me to tell you that a big part of the attraction of air shows is the chance that one gets to be up close to these incredible machines. You know, have a really good look at them, sit in the cockpit, that kind of thing. Of course, the real thrills come from seeing these planes in action. Air acrobatics and stunt flying have been around pretty much since planes were invented, and the popularity of air shows endures to this day. Low-level flyovers by jets are especially fan favourites, as they're just so awesome. Where I live, we get occasional flyovers by jets from the airbase at Montreal. I always stop whatever I'm doing to look up to see if I can see them. Even if I'm inside, sometimes I'll run outside to see if I can catch a glimpse of them as they zip overhead, much to the amusement of my family. The lower they are, the louder they are, and the more impressive. However, getting too low to the ground is always risky, and however experienced the pilots might be, there's always a chance of something going wrong. And on Saturday, July the 27th, 2002, during a display of acrobatic flying at Sknyliv Airfield in the Ukraine, things went wrong, very wrong, and the consequences were absolutely tragic. The air show was being held to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Ukrainian 14th Air Corps. With an estimated attendance of over 10,000 spectators, it was a massive, sprawling event, with lots of impressive aircraft on the ground and displays of acrobatic flying above. It was a warm and sunny day, and video recorded at the time shows families milling around, enjoying the show and the spectacle. Just after midday, crowds were watching an aerial display being put on by Air Force pilot Vladimir Toponar and his co-pilot that day, Yuri Yegorov. They were flying an Su-27 Flanker, a Soviet-era twin-engined fighter jet, putting it through its paces for the enthralled crowds below. Now, the Su-27's not a small jet, it's a big twin-engined beast, but it is extremely manoeuvrable. Its signature move is the Cobra, where the plane pulls up sharply, past vertical, to perform a rapid air brake, before nosing back down and resuming flight. It's that spectacular move that Tom Cruise does a couple of times in Top Gun Maverick. The lead pilot, Vladimir Toponar, was a member of the Ukrainian Falcons, an aerobatic team from the Ukrainian Air Force famed for their spectacular stunt flying. So on paper, everything should have been just fine. You've got a top pilot. He's a member of the Air Force aerobatics team. He's flying a large but highly nimble fighter jet in a solo display. It should have been a walk in the park, but it wasn't, and from the outset things seemed off. A translation of the cockpit chatter between the pilots and ground control indicates that as they began their display, they didn't seem to know where the crowds were. Pilot, where are the spectators? Co-pilot, I don't know where they are. Pilot, there, I see them. Co-pilot, not on the right. Pilot to control, executing left turn. Co-pilot, should we go? Control, turn left, turn left. This confusion as to where the spectator area was seems to have led the pilots into performing manoeuvres in the wrong airspace. Some manoeuvres were executed directly over the heads of the spectators. One inverted half loop that should have been performed side on to the spectators was instead made heading facing directly into the crowd. Coming in too low, the cockpit voice warnings began to squawk. Angle of attack critical, pull up. Experiencing hypercritical G-loads. On video, the jet is seen coming down out of what looked to be a split S manoeuvre performed at low altitude, but instead of pulling up, it just seems to keep on falling, coming in low, way too low. Having clipped the branch of a tall tree on the perimeter of the field, the pilot appears to be unable to get the nose up, and the left wingtip strikes the ground as terrified spectators just feet away either turn to flee or remain rooted to the spot, paralysed with fear. The damaged jet levels out, but it has no time or room to avoid the parked plane just ahead. At the last moment, the pilots, having no time left, eject, but the Su-27, now an uncontrolled speeding mass of 26 tons of metal, glass, rubber and jet fuel, hurtled on towards the crowd. It clipped the nose cone of the parked Ilyushin 76 transport plane before cartwheeling end over end, ploughing through the crowd and exploding in a huge fireball. The aftermath was, to put it mildly, absolutely horrendous. Whilst doing the research for this video, I saw a couple of the photographs of the crash site, and it's no wonder that witnesses to this tragedy needed counselling afterwards. It's truly awful. Words just don't do justice to the scene that must have greeted the rescue workers that day. It's horrible. It's just horrible. People were wandering around, injured and dazed, while victims lay strewn across the tarmac. It was a vision of hell. It seemed that in its final seconds, the wing of the jet also became entangled with a wire fence, ripping this barbed wire through the crowd as the jet twirled above, spraying out burning jet fuel. Eyewitness Sergei remembered watching as the Su-27 surged low over the spectators when it clipped its wing against the tree. I knew that was it. I immediately dropped my camera, and my first thought was my wife and son. He and his two older boys ran to where he'd left his wife and his infant child, only to see they were already gone. He wasn't alone in losing somebody that day. The accident killed 77 people, and more than 540 were injured, many of them seriously. Amongst the dead were 28 children. An excerpt from the Ukrainian weekly newspaper gives a sense of the terrible tragedy that unfolded on that fateful day. Yuri Motuzwik was left an orphan, alive and alone on the airport tarmac, covered in ash and soot and crying after the debris and the jet fuel fireball killed his parents. Petro Mikhailov lost his son, Andriy, and his stepdaughter, Natalia, and two granddaughters, Adriana and Natalia, aged 6 and 8. Mikhailov had a heart attack at the morgue while identifying their remains. Bogdan Onshchak lost his 11-month-old granddaughter, Yarnya, her father, 25-year-old Olya, and another son, Yuri, 23. Both pilots had survived. The co-pilot, Yuri Yegorov, had pulled the handle at the last possible moment. The pilot, Vladimir Toponar, had apparently kept on fighting with the controls until Yegorov ejected them both. They landed in the airfield just a few hundred feet from the scene of carnage. Goodness only knows what they must have felt when looking around at what had just happened. The investigation into the air show was swift to find the pilots culpable. They were accused of reckless endangerment, failing to follow orders, and of attempting to perform flying manoeuvres of which they had no previous experience. In their defence, both Toponar and Yegorov stated that they had been given an incorrect map of the airfield layout on the day of the show. Their map didn't match the layout on the ground, incorrectly showing where the spectator area was. Also, on the day prior to the incident, they'd requested extra time to practice at Sknyliv Airfield, but this request had been denied. Maintenance records for the Su-27 also showed that the left-hand engine had the RPM speed set slower than what it should have been. However, this fact was deemed not to be relevant to the crash. Despite their pleas of innocence, in 2004 both pilots ended up in court. 3 judges from the Air Ministry found them guilty and sentenced them to prison terms of 14 and 8 years, plus each was fined a sum equivalent to over $1 million US. 2 flight officials were also jailed for failures to adequately ensure the safety of the spectators and failures in the organisation of the air show. The co-pilot served 3 years before being released, and Chief Pilot Toponar served 8 years. He was released in 2013 on condition that he reported back to the prison once a month. He was also banned from using any kind of vehicle, even a bicycle. Despite having served his sentence, Toponar continued to proclaim his innocence. In a 2013 interview, he stated, "The parameters we were given significantly exceeded the safe margin of separation from spectators. What happened is the fault of the organisers. Planes should not fly over spectators. During the show, I noticed decreased thrust of both engines and the airspeed fell, but the cause remains unknown. Ground control ordered us to continue the flight. During the last manoeuvre, the plane became uncontrollable. They said it was caused by inexperience. I have 27 years in the cockpit. I was a member of the Ukrainian Falcons. To the last, I struggled to lift that plane, but co-pilot Yuri Egorov hit the catapult and we ejected. Although the cause of the crash still remains disputed, at least by Toponar, the effects were visible for all to see. 77 lives lost, hundreds of spectators were injured, families were shattered, children were orphaned, and witnesses were traumatised. The scars from the Sknyliv Air Show disaster still run deep to this day.